the last part of our video lesson on evolution. So let's talk about the evidence that supports evolution, what Darwin came up with, and what scientists have kind of put together since as far as evidence for this prevailing theory of how species come about. So recall for me that a theory is a widely accepted statement based on scientific evidence that helps explain a group of facts. So theories are something that explains things. Remember, our laws tell us what's going to happen. So evolution is a theory, not a law, so it helps explain why we have the different species that we do have and how they're changing. Let's talk about, so we have two pieces of evidence that kind of goes along with our evidence supporting the Earth's history. So we have biological evidence, so our living evidence, and then we also have geological evidence of evolution in the fossil record. So we're going to start with our biological or organic support of evolution. So these are genetic changes in a population or organisms. So this could be something that we even see with our eyes, so how a population changes. Now this is going to be easier to see in species with small generation periods, so like flies, fruit flies especially, are one of the things that we use to study evolution. We use mice as well, but their generation time is longer than ours. It wouldn't be very helpful to study things like elephants who live for a very long time, or even birds who live for a really long time, as far as being able to actually see and chart the changes of a population and how they evolve. Is the change, the change over time in the proportion of individuals differing in one or more inherited trait. So this is kind of how organisms change over time. That's our biological evidence. We also have some structural differences in our organisms that we see. So here are structural similarities. We call these vestigial structures. They're found in organisms like, what's our example? Like a notochord is there's speculation as to whether like our appendages and like our wisdom teeth, as far as humans go, are vestigial structures, but they're physical structures that we find in organisms that are fully developed and functional in an ancestral group, but are later reduced and unused in later species. So like our vestigial structure of the coccyx or the tailbone, that was something that our ancestors used, and we have later evolved it. We don't have that anymore. This is a whale tail, and you can see that the whale actually, in fact, does have a pelvis, or the reduced structure of a pelvis in the femur, suggesting that it evolved from a tetrapod at one time, or an organism that had legs or fins. But we call those vestigial structures. One example here, snakes have traces of leg-like structures. Whales have also have small leg-like structures that are not used. So vestigial structures, they're in the organism that we're seeing today, the structure is reduced and unused, but in our ancestral group, it was fully developed and functional. So it's something that we have evolved not to use anymore, and then we can see it in many species. Our examples here are snakes and whales, but we even have them as humans as well. Got to sneeze. Our notochord is one example in the species, in humans as well. So in order to be a vertebrate species, you've got to have 5 characteristics. One of those is a notochord. Many of our lamprey have an actual notochord, but we have evolved in humans specifically to not have that notochord anymore. We have a very small piece. It's called the nucleus pulpalis. It's in your vertebrae. Let me find it for you. I have one. So in humans, we've got the notochord, which makes us a vertebrae. But here's my vertebrae that I have. This structure right here, we call the nucleus pulpalis, and it is the only remnants of our notochord that we have. It's similar to cartilage, as in it functions as like a joint lubricant between our vertebrae, so it makes sure that our vertebrae aren't getting friction in between them where they connect, and that's pretty much its function. And it helps absorb impact a little bit. This is different than a cartilage disc. It is called a nucleus pulpalis. Okay. So that's just one example of a vestigial structure that we have that makes us vertebrates. So we also have things that are similar in structure but different in function. So many species share similar structures, but they have very different functions, like lizards, bats, and manatees all have forelimbs, but with similar bone structures. So they have the phalanges and the ulna and the radius, but they all are used in very different ways. For example, if you look here on my little chart, all the bones are similar colors, so you can trace them easily through these diagrams, but just as a human has an ulna, so does a cat, which walks very differently, and a whale even so in its flipper, and a bat even so more. So we all have the same, or some of the animals and organisms have the same bone structure, they're just developed differently than other organisms. So you can see we have all the same bones as a whale. Ours are just structured a little bit differently, and they definitely function in a different way. We don't use ours to propel us through the water unless we're swimming, but we swim very differently than a whale. We could talk about that another day. Also, with our bats, they have similar structures as well, but we obviously don't fly, nor even do we walk like a cat. Okay. And lastly, there's just another comparison for you between a human and a dog as far as bone structure, but like I said, it is different because we've evolved differently. And lastly, we have our similarities in development. So various animals look similar in their earliest stages of life. In fact, if I showed you embryonic stages of us, a fish, and a pig, you would definitely not be able to tell what is what. Actually, that's what this picture is right here. So these are the early stages of development, maybe like mid-development, and then our fetal stage. So if you look at all of these early development structures, there's really not that much different. We've got gill slits in all of the organisms, but we don't start seeing differentiation until much later from like our fish compared to our chicken, compared to our pig, compared to even us. So we all look very, very similar developmentally. So that's one evidence that supports evolution. There is again, and they named what the organisms are for you. And lastly, our genetic evidence in the terms of our DNA. DNA is the genetic material found in all organisms. We know this, we studied this. It contains all the information organisms need to grow and to maintain themselves. And our DNA is very, very similar to all the other organisms on Earth. The more closely we are related, the more chromosomes or genetic genes we would have that mirror theirs. For example, we have about 99% of the DNA that a chimpanzee has. Scientists say that this supports the idea that humans were evolved from chimps. But when organisms reproduce, again, they pass their DNA on to their offspring. So this is another piece of evidence that science cites to support evolution. Again, we looked at this. This is our gel electrophoresis symbols. So we're looking at a couple of examples of DNA evidence between organisms. Scientists are able to tell how closely organisms are related by comparing their DNA. So like if I wanted to compare the DNA of a mother, a child, and the alleged father, I could do that using DNA samples. All right, guys. This is the end of the lecture. I hope you enjoyed. We will pick back up next week talking about fossils. Have a great day. If you have questions, email me.